to my accountant. I like the swordfish you keep in a tank. I like the T-bills you keep in a bank. I like the purple hose and purple shoes and Peter Jennings on the evening. Excuse me while I talks to my insurance agent. Get a load of this.
Well, howdy, folks. Howdy, folks. How y'all doing tonight? I'm doing my very best Texas accent here because here I am coming to you from Houston, Texas. Here it is, public affairs, public access. Here it is, I reckon sometime about November, maybe about 17th thereof, about 6:30 p.m. where we are. Okay, and you know me, I'm Colby, Paul Colby. I'm with you periodically. I come into your life and let's say in and out of your life on a fairly regular basis just to give you a very unique viewpoint about what's happening all over the place and sometimes right here where I am, but especially all over the place. And for those of you who are tuning in on the World Wide Web from parts very remote from where I am, and for those of you who are digging through your library of DVDs, say some 11 years from now, and are trying to remember what it is you recorded that night, I'm going to give you some pointers. Like I said, it's Houston, and Houston is where, well, it's kind of a home to astronauts and a home to Astros. It used to be the home of the space program. Of course, all of the space shuttles that ought to be stored here historically are being sent other places now, and the Houston Astros, the National League Baseball team, are moving, even though they're not physically moving, just moving to the American League. For a lot of us, moving to the American League just about means that they may as well be gone, because a lot of us aren't going to, well, I'm not going to speak for everybody. A lot of us are pretty upset by this. In any case, it is fall, and when you are in Texas in the fall and into the winter as well, it's that strange time of year where you turn on the heater in the evening and then you might be running the air conditioner in the morning on the way to work. And it's almost Thanksgiving, so everybody is getting their tofurkey recipes ready to go. And as a general proposition, Christmas tree decorations are starting to pop out of the woodwork. As a matter of fact, I have my Christmas stocking up already. And you know why? Let me give you a pointer here. This is something that you can all learn. If you just leave things up the whole year, then you don't even have to put them back up. And that's sort of what I did here. I left the Christmas tree lights on the front porch. I just don't turn them on, and the stockings are ready to go, and even the fake mistletoe. If you use fake mistletoe, it lasts well over a year, you know, Christmas to Christmas and so forth. Well, what are we going to talk about this evening? As you know, we always have a lot to talk about. My staff always kind of brings me up to speed on the most recent developments so that I can opine on them if necessary. And I opine from the standpoint of a kind of an independent thinker, even though I am a wildly progressive, left-wing, libertarian, idiosyncratic metaphysician. I give it to everybody if they deserve what's coming, and I praise everybody if that's what they deserve. So we often hear a lot of politics when I'm talking to you, just because that is what a lot of the people are talking about in their own homes, in their own cars, in their own offices, by their own water coolers, and on talk radio and on superficial news programs. But you don't get the perspective you're going to get here for the most part. And where would I like to start tonight? Well, this may surprise you a little bit, but I want to talk about puppy pregnancy syndrome. I often read Scientific American, and I just could not resist sharing with you this unusual situation that is being discovered in West Bengal in India. West Bengal, kind of a small place, I think. I'm not going to say it's backward. I've never been there, but when I tell you what's going on, you might think things are a little retro. Because these days, when people there feel pain, discomfort, flatulence, nausea, difficulty urinating, and a host of similar symptoms, what they think is involved is puppy pregnancy syndrome. And in kind of a nutshell, this means that by devices not well understood, men become pregnant with puppies. Dogs, I mean. Dogs, you know, canine dogs. Well, this would appear to be something that is in these people's heads entirely. In other words, you will not find many verified examples of men having litters of puppies, especially litters of puppies that they didn't want. But it is a significant problem, and psychotherapists deal with it all the time there, and people believe it very much. They believe it very much. And what would be my point in sharing this with you? Well, if you think it's weird, that people could believe something like that, I want to tell you that there are still a few people, certainly not many, who believe Lee Harvey Oswald is the lone assassin of John F. Kennedy. As you know, next week on the 22nd, will mark the 48th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy. And what surprises me a lot about this, as I reflect on the days, it surprises me that there are still people who believe, or who are attempting to get others to believe for purposes which should be quite obvious, maintenance of the military-industrial complex and maintenance of the shadow government, and so you know, you've heard it all before. There are people who are resurrecting these lame allegations that were disproven years ago, usually on TV shows that start with something that looks like a new pseudoscientific development that demonstrates something that hasn't been provable before, and is followed by a regurgitation of the same old Warren Commission findings that were, well, out of style almost as soon as they were written. I think it's admirable that the American people have always not believed Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin of John F. Kennedy. At least they didn't believe he acted alone. And over time, as more and more people have become familiar with the facts, a large number of those people actually think he wasn't involved at all. Thank goodness they're getting that. It's worth noting that there are some different things about conspiracy thinking in the era of the 1960s versus the era of now, because conspiracy theories get a pretty bad name in the establishment press. Even though people like Jesse Ventura have TV programs that go through very clear indictments of certain cover stories, and even though a lot of people read widely on the internet, conspiracy thinking, so-called, is generally poo-pooed. People will believe anything. Well, that's not true. But there are a couple of kinds of wild stories out there, some with direct lineage from the early 60s, the writings in Ramparts, the early Kennedy assassination research, et cetera, go to players involved in real plots that and or stage manipulated events that have the consequence of orchestrating public belief and or manipulating public opinion and or taking the nation into war, for example, things like that. These stage-managed events are instantly dissected, taken apart, reviewed by all sorts of people these days in the modern internet era. And if you think back, when people were doing the early research on the Kennedy assassination way back then, when there were 26 volumes of the Warren Commission report and not that many even printed, it was hard for everybody to get primary data. It was hard to do that. These days, I'm sure you could put everything in the Warren Commission's exhibits and everything in the House Assassination Committee's 1980s report on maybe a jump drive and carry the whole thing around with you, and you can go to internet sites and find it for free. And if you have the time and inclination to read it all, there it is. In the old days, we looked for JFK assassination films and photographs and had to go to great lengths to turn those up. And these days, things show up on the internet, not just about this old conspiracy, but about modern ones in real time. And so my thought about all of this is just, it's nice when you have some information, because then you can evaluate the instant information that is out there to supplement what you do know. But if you're dumb, or if you're not paying much attention, or if you're not interested in politics and history, or if you're lazy, or if you're confused, or, as is the case for most people, if you just have a job that you're trying to maintain, or two, so that you can get by and very little time to do, historical research when you're not working, well, you can fall prey to instant storytelling on the internet that doesn't pass muster, that isn't peer-reviewed, that in most cases is bogus on its face, but it's an interesting paradox. There's so much useful information out there, and there's so much junk. And when we look at it in the context of the current political debate, we're going to see the same thing. There are certain things that are quite obvious and that can be researched and that can be intelligently debated, and then there is a bunch of garbage material that just comes down the pike all the time, and most people are tired of hearing about it. But anyway, I mentioned the Kennedy assassination because it's almost 50 years ago that the United States turned into a banana republic, that first round of a silent coup which put in place the military-industrial complex, which later, over the years, involved us losing more and more of our civil rights, gradually with moving up to the present time with the real big stage-managed events that create certain consequences. Well, you can see it all there, and you can see that the people who actually pull the strings are back there pulling strings all the time, and it almost appears at times, and we're going to talk more about this as we go down this road tonight. It appears at times that they just stay in power and could care less that we go along with the charade that we get to vote and do something when they own all of Congress, they own the executive branch, and more recently, they even own the Supremes, who, well, you know what the Supremes say about corporations. They're people, and we'll come back around to that too. So, now that I've set the framework, the JFK assassination was about 48 years ago, and this is a time, you'll recall that in a long string of events from that Kennedy assassination up through the Vietnam War, there was a massive explosion of ideas, and then there was a massive protest against institutions, and there was an expansion of thought, and there was a lot more sex and things like that, and a lot more marijuana, so forth. You know what was there. But I believe, as I'm looking at today's landscape, because that all got repressed in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and even over the last decade. But now, it looks like things are getting warm again. The worm is turning, if you like that phrase. I never understood too much about that worm turning stuff. But anyway, the Republican debates. It seems like every time I'm here, I have to talk about the Republican debates. And tonight, it's not going to be any exception. You know, the main thing that we are seeing in the Republican debates is that the Republicans don't want Romney to be their nominee, and they are desperately looking for anybody who can fill the bill and not be Romney, but their idea of who that might be, well, that's kind of in flux, isn't it? In the very beginning, Michelle Bachmann was taken off like a rocket, and then she kind of evaporated quickly. Ron Paul found himself right there in second place in one of the earliest straw polls, and of course, most of the major media and the rest of the Republicans pretended like they hadn't even noticed that. But anyway, he had his moment, and he's had some, pretty good moments after that. Then Rick Perry hit the floor, and my golly, he was so hot for the first week that nobody wanted to take their cameras and notepads and such other devices, audio recording devices, around to any other camps because it was Rick Perry's day in the street. But of course, he's had this problem with, what do we call it, brain lock, fuzziness, fuzziness. And so his star is not exactly rising at the moment, but Herman Cain's is. Herman Cain, coming out of nowhere, jumped right up there in front of everybody. And oddly, after he did, and after he started taking some bad press because of some bad events that happened, Newt Gingrich suddenly came out of nowhere. It's hard to explain why, but he did. So what we have seen so far is, and I guess I haven't mentioned Mr. Huntsman. Yeah, well, I haven't mentioned Mr. Hudson. Anyway, looking at what's going on, it's obvious that there hasn't been a decision made, but I want you to know that the polls that I'm seeing are flawed just because they are, and you've seen this in politics for a long time. Sometimes you ask the wrong question and you get one answer. If you phrase the question differently, then you see what people are really thinking. And what occurred to me was the right people are not in the race, and that's why we keep getting these skewed results. If we knew how candidates were doing against other potential contenders, why, that might make some more sense. Like, for example, one poll came to my attention when Walt Disney, now of course, he's long dead, and I'm not making any excuses for that, but a lot of people apparently would like to vote for Walt Disney, and when they do, the numbers come up pretty good for Romney. He's not that far behind Walt Disney. Herman Cain kind of drops off, and so does Rick Perry. It's odd, but you think that's it. You know these TV commercials that you see lately that start off paid spokesman, and then you have some idiot who doesn't look good on camera, so he hired some old geezer with a beard who looks somebody who looks like he came off a 3-day drunk to sell you some legal aid or something. Well, anyway, paid spokesperson apparently is a very popular figure out there, because when paid spokesperson is in the race, he comes out on top, way out on top. Gingrich, for some reason, maybe because he also seems kind of like a paid spokesman, comes right behind him, and then Mr. Cain and Mr. Perry and Mr. Romney is picking up the caboose on this one. Is it surprising? Well, I came across another poll. These things are amazing. When you put the corporations into the race, because remember now, the Supremes have told us that corporations are, people. They're just people. So if instead of having their surrogate that they bought and paid for, you just have corporations running, look at how well Exxon does. Right up there at the top, beating out Mr. Hudson, beating out Bachmann, and Walmart comes in down here at the bottom, trailing considerably, but you get my point. It depends on what questions are being asked. And Another curiosity about this race that I just can't give up trying to research, because it's important to a lot of people. Some of the Republican candidates, not just one, have mentioned that they're running because God sort of wants them to. And when people started talking about that, well, kind of bugged me that God would be picking winners. And what occurred to me was that maybe, since God had spoken to several people, maybe he wanted 3 or 4 presidents. Now, that's one aspect, but then, you know how resourceful I am in doing research. I turned some stuff up for you here. Now, you can see it for yourself. Let me have a look at my copy here. This is a letter that comes to Michelle Bachmann, but it's surprising it doesn't seem to come from the God that we're normally talking about, you know, the Almighty, the big girl. Instead, it comes from somebody named Bobby God Richardson, middle name God, who was with the Hoover Brothers Circus. And anyway, it's apparently that God, Bobby God Richardson, who told Michelle Bachmann that she should run. Surprising, huh? Well, here's what happens when you dig deeper. It turns out that Rick Perry was asked to run by Mr. God C. McMuser. I'm not familiar with Mr. McMuser. Maybe some of you recognize him. He lives in Barley House, Arizona. It says here, "Dear Rick, I know it's asking a lot, but I figure you owe me for backing up your story about the Gila monster attacking your shrimp boat. Would you mind running for president?" Okay, so now we've got it. There's 2 different gods involved here, but didn't Herman Cain also say God wanted him to run? Well, yes. Well, sure. In this case, Bennington J. God, who lives in Stove Picture, Alabama. I'm not familiar with Stove Picture, but you know, he writes, "Dear Herman, where's my pizza? I ordered it half an hour ago. Just kidding. Look, I've got a great idea. You should run for president. It would be a hoot." Some of the rest of it here is a little, you know, private, so I'm not going to read that, but you get my point here. Well, now we can see exactly what's happening out there. Now, don't keep paying attention to that, because I'm going to go on. You know, the basic thing that we keep hearing more and more, we hear attacks on Obamacare and economic plans, entitlements, you know. At the same time, and this is pretty typical, you know, the whole time we have bashing going on here from Newt Gingrich. We find out yesterday that he was getting money from Freddie Mac. Isn't that exciting? It sounds so typical, but let's just be realistic about this, friends. I'm going to say that if these people were in touch with those in the real world, they would be talking about strengthening entitlements, not reducing entitlements. And would this be easy to do? I mean, if somebody wanted to step forward and do something bold, yes, it would be. You know, 2/3 of the increase in spending over the last decades is from military spending. The other day, I was listening to a speech in the 60s by Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was recalling, this is in the era of the Vietnam War. He was pointing out that for every enemy we killed, so-called enemy, in that situation, we were spending a couple of $100,000. Think about that, folks. Spending a couple of $100,000 per kill. And think about what we spend in Iraq. We've spent billions in reconstruction for Iraq, and we had to spend billions in reconstruction because we deconstructed it with shock and awe, knowing full well there were no weapons of mass destruction present, no basis for attacking them at all under international law, and causing primarily civilian deaths more than anything else, and instigating a civilian war, et cetera, et cetera. But we could reconstruct Iraq. We are not, over the last 4 years here, with Republicans dominating the inactivity, we are not, let me repeat that, we are not seeming to be able to reconstruct any of America, even though we can go everywhere else and reconstruct. It just kind of puzzles me. Of all those Republican candidates, the only one who attacks foreign policy is Mr. Ron Paul, and certainly I don't agree with him on almost anything, except that he is so principled with respect to military and Federal Reserve issues. And he's absolutely right that we don't need to be pursuing this foreign policy and spending that much on national defense when all we are actually doing is making the war on terror worse by alienating all of the world, most of the world, except for a few people in our pocket, usually the same tin-horn dictators that in this magical time are being swept under the rug by people who are tired of having tin-horn dictators supported by the United States. Think about that. And of course, you know, there's attacks on immigrants. There's proposals like Herman Cain's for building bigger fences, building bigger fences and stuff like that. There's always attacks on media elites by these people in the Republican debates, and it's interesting to me, you know, actually the media elites are pretty well, the media elites, they probably are being a little bit more superficial than even they are used to being, but having said that, they are not being ultimately disparaging to the Republican candidates. In fact, they're repeating most of the silly things that these people say. And I think the perspective, one that is refreshing, is to understand that Colby and Jon Stewart are probably more highly regarded as newscasters among at least some of the younger generation than any of the talking heads on TV. Like I say, though, what it's going to come down to ultimately is you know, I'm not likely to vote for a Republican, you know that, but if I were going to have to vote for a Republican, I think maybe I would, my choice, the least dangerous of the moderate Republicans would be Barack Obama, I guess, until we have an actual candidate on the left. But you know, you don't even have to support candidates or a party to get in there and make use of what's going on. I think I'm going to go into business here creating slogans and signs for people to use in their campaigns. For example, you know, Mr. Cain is doing too good these days, and so when we say raise Cain, that means one thing, but there might be some people who would rather raise Cain. So we can make both of those signs. Now, if Michelle Bachmann could somehow turn things around, and it's unlikely, maybe she would be able to Michelle-abrate along with all of her supporters. Now, there are a whole lot of people who don't like the Texas governor, and they would probably say Barry Perry, but those who are still sticking around because he has so much money he's going to have to stay in to spend it all, they would just be telling you, look, Perry, not scary, not scary. And assuming that Newt Gingrich hangs around, some people on his side are going to be saying, Newt's cute, while others, they're going to be saying, Newt, not. Okay, so if you have a little spare time on your hands, or if you're among the many millions of Americans who are unemployed, and I'll enumerate that a little bit more as we go down the road, well, maybe you should go into the business of making signs, All right? See what I mean? All right, now, I saved this part for last because this is going to spill over not only from the Republican debates, but into political life generally, and then into the larger sphere, the bigger arena, and that's sex and politics. Woo! It's so hot in here already. I just don't know if I can bear to read through all of this stuff that I put together for you, but But anyway, I'm going to get you started because you know, with what's going down for Herman Cain these days, I had to step back and say to myself, because there was such a quick onslaught, and of course he didn't impress me with denying and then not being able to remember, and then remembering but not remembering any details, and then forcefully denying, and then what he did. But it is always good, I think, to maintain the presumption of innocence. And why is that? Well, I highlighted that point for you up above when I said that these days, stuff gets out on the internet, some true, some false, and especially in political campaigns, most of what's out there could be considered to be garbage unless proven otherwise, because of the pioneering work of Karl Rove, for example. And understand, when you think about Republicans, it's so bad, mentioning Karl Rove again, you remember how when he was working for Bush in the state of Texas, he started whispered rumors that Ann Richards was a lesbian. That's what he did. Then George Bush is running against John McCain, and some rumors get started on the campaign trail, about a love child. These Republicans are so nasty. Democrats haven't learned to be quite that nasty yet. They just have people like John Edwards who do it to themselves for the most part. But they're nasty at each other in the primaries, let alone do they get nastier still when things get closer to the real deal. So as much as I want to hold back and presume innocence, and by the way, you've been telling me up there that it's 30 minutes for some time. My clock here, it's less than 30 minutes now. You see what I mean? All right. We're keeping track of time because we have so much to say as usual. Anyway, stepping forward and denying, well, what can you say? The one reason that I have some pause about believing the accusations against Herman Cain is that, in theory, I have seen news clippings to this effect and internet postings to this effect. In theory, somebody did a voice stress evaluation which says he's telling the truth. Well, I could spend a whole hour telling you about voice stress evaluations. No, I could spend 3 hours, so we're going to drop that subject. But it's hurtful to me to think about people who may have been damaged. It's also hurtful to see the stuff that gets thrown around. For example, Newt Gingrich telling Herman that he's got to come clean. Boy, that's sounding pretty weird from a guy who you know Newt's history. A little bad acting there in the field of sexual politics. He's had several wives. He dismissed one of them while she was getting ready to undergo cancer treatment and so on. But I was really surprised to come across a statement that was made in theory by Newt Gingrich on Pat Robertson's show the other day, because they wanted comment from him about his kind of racy past. And this is a mind-boggling statement. He said, "There's no question, at times of my life, partially driven by how passionately I felt about this country, that I worked far too hard and things happened in my life that were not appropriate." So, in other words, just because he loved the country so much and was working pretty hard, well, inappropriate things happened. Usually, when inappropriate things happen, it's because, somebody did something. You can always tell, though, when sex is involved and rears its ugly head in a political context, it's usually because somebody is trying to get somebody else to shut up. that is one thing I think a lot of people not paying enough attention have missed in the whole WikiLeaks saga. The role of one of the ladies, Anna Arden, I didn't have the name memorized, whose connections to CIA intelligence operations are pretty interesting. The whole situation with WikiLeaks, you know, some can make an argument, and I can listen to it because you can make a good argument that maybe Julian Assange is actually doing some covert work for the CIA by surfacing materials that ultimately will be to their benefit and will, you know, cripple others. Same sort of things were said about Daniel Ellsberg, in that his disclosures pretty much exonerated the CIA and dumped everything on the military. But you know what? When you come down to the brass tacks of these things, when you see lurid sex charges being injected after somebody has done the kind of work that Julian Assange has done, it's pretty sickening, and that's kind of a dead giveaway that the sex charge is part of some sort of intelligence operation. At least, almost all the people like me on the planet believe that to be true, which is why we haven't given money to Amazon or MasterCard or PayPal for 6 or 7 months now, because those clowns tried to stop democracy from happening. So, anyway, you know, this problem with sexual dalliance, it's obviously not limited to the political sphere right now. You know, the Catholic Church in Philadelphia is having big problems that even resulted in an excommunication and firing of about 20 priests. I can remember when going to Catholic school, I was an altar boy. These days, with all of the bad stuff going down, you'd think maybe altar boys have to sign releases to even get to do that kind of work. And it goes to football programs like Penn State's. And I don't have to tell you about that. It's all over the papers. But I'm wondering if in their new building program they're going to install 2 sets of showers, one like the horseplay showers and one just regular showers for people who don't want to do horseplay. Anyway, it's interesting that what's going on in that political world and in those Republican debates is kind of a mirror or the opposite of what's going on in the rest of the world. So I'm talking about, and I'm going to get into Occupy Wall Street, and I'm going to get into the debate about corporations and their role and stuff like that. But I just received here sort of a phone call. You know, I don't do phone call. I don't answer calls on this show very often because I have so much to say that I don't have time to answer calls. But when somebody is intelligent enough to beam the broadcast to me directly, as apparently someone has, and from another solar system, it feels like. Anyway, they have a question, and I'm happy to answer it. They're asking me about, because, you know, they know the Republicans are standing for, more than anything else, big business. Despite the wreck that everybody else finds themselves in, they want to support big business. And they're asking me, aren't there examples of nice things going on in big business? And they think about Steve Jobs. Well, it just so happens I was talking to some people in the know about Steve Jobs, who just passed away. And I have to tell you that one part of his marketing genius that is not talked about is the products that he kept from coming to the market. Not so much the ones that did come to market. I found out about this just recently. Do you know that his people wanted to develop the eyeball? The eyeball. Problem with the eyeball was it is pretty big, not like those very portable Apple products, and it didn't do very much. And then He also stopped them from creating the Idaho, which was another fairly large Apple product, and it didn't compute very well, but apparently it baked well. And I've also heard tell, can't confirm it, that he stopped the development of an iRock, and you can see that just would not have been a popular area to go. I mean, it wouldn't have, the name itself. I'm not sure what the iRock was going to do, but I can tell you right now that most of America is tired of iRock, so it wouldn't be going along fine. But you know, while those Republicans are talking about running the country like a business, that's essentially what they're saying. You know, Herman Cain, for example, I'm a businessman and I'm gonna run things like a business. Well, you know, government. I'm a political science major, by the way. Have I mentioned that less than 18 times? Anyway, it was my major. It was a course of study that put me in good stead here for all of the things that I do. And anyway, that's another story you don't want to get into. It's an even longer story. It's an even longer story than the stress evaluation story would have been. But I can tell you very definitely, and so can a lot of other people, that government need not be always run like a business. In fact, one reason for government, and there are stricter interpretations, but the basic thing that government does is things that government does better than, you know, businesses and corporations. There are things that the government should do. In other words, there are certain things that need not be profit centers. I'll talk about healthcare in a minute as an example of that, but for a whole lot of people intellectually lazy, there is actually a belief that the form of government here is capitalism. The form of government here actually is a Republican democracy. What does that mean? It means the will of the people, the democracy, and laws to govern the rights of those, you know, who are in the minority. A Republican democracy. And boy, that's good stuff. It is true that past presidents years back have said the business of America is business. Okay? Well, up to a point it can be, but it is not our form of government. And excuse me, since it is not our form of government, a lot of people are irritated with the practices of capitalism these days. Outsourcing is, for example, frowned upon because at a time when so many Americans are jobless, jobs are not being created here, they're going elsewhere. Now, are corporations people or not? Have a look here. Look at this thing. You could say that corporations are people because they have birthdays, okay? You could say maybe they have offspring. They can get married in the sense of mergers, for example, or they can get divorced. They can give gifts, but you know they usually give gifts if there's a tax break involved. And corporations can have Facebook pages. So in that sense, they do look a whole lot like people. But on the other hand, they don't drive cars. They don't get their hair done. As far as I know, they don't sing songs. They don't get drunk. Well, maybe they get drunk with power, okay? They don't dance. And especially, this is why they're not people, they don't do jail time when they do things wrong, especially when they do serious things wrong. And so a lot of people are upset with the behavior of corporations at a time when our form of government, if it were capitalism, isn't serving us very well. Look at this little piece describing Americans. 14 million out of work. That equates to about 9%. Of the largest number ever in our history on food stamps, about 45 million. That's 15%. No health insurance, about 50 million people. People lost their homes, estimated that in the last 2 years about 2 million have. Behind on their mortgages a couple of months, about 5 million. So what is that saying? Well, that's saying that the economic system, if it's benefiting someone, it is what is being called these days, the 1%, not the 99%, because most of you will find yourselves either in here or thinking about when you're going to be in here pretty soon. But the frustration that people have, you know, I was telling you before about some numbers here. You know, our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq over 10 years have cost us a lot of money. You know, the official estimates that are in the 1.2 trillion, that just can't be accepted as reasonable. Brown University did a study talking about the real costs, the spillover costs, the hidden costs. Number is more like $3.7 trillion. That means that for all of us in America, we're spending about $12,000. So government programs could be in place that do more in the way of entitlements, because we aren't getting an economy that produces jobs that people can use to make money, which is what people mostly used to do with jobs. And we're destroying, or we are curtailing expenditures for and are unnecessarily policing the educational system so that we have kids who remain further behind kids in other countries who are doing much better. And it's in the context of all of this. And let's talk about here. Let's get another beef on the table here. You're always hearing, especially from, say, the Republican candidates debating, talk about illegal immigrants and what they cost the economy and stuff like that. You don't hear very often that an estimate in 2010 was done just talking about taxes paid to state and local governments, which indicated that perhaps $11 billion comes into government coffers from the taxes paid by households that are headed by what we would call an illegal immigrant. If you think about that, that's a considerable chunk of money, okay? And you often hear sometimes in political discourse the conception that ExxonMobil and various oil companies pay zero in federal income taxes. And so to give them a break, I want to be honest, yes, a lot of them don't pay federal income taxes. They do pay some other kinds of taxes and so forth, and they pay fees. But in 2009, the estimate coming from ExxonMobil was that they had spent a total of $9.8 billion in taxes, all sorts of taxes, for that year. So look at that. Illegal immigrants put more money in the government, than this giant oil company does. And so we're out here while record profits are being made. Many people are underwater. And what's been the result of that? Well, the result of that has been Occupy New York, and then Occupy Portland, and then Occupy Denver, and then Occupy Oakland, and Occupy cities all over the world, because people all over the world are tired of corporations behaving like not just people, but greedier than hell, really greedy people who don't care much about the earth that they are depleting of resources, and the few who are living a sybaritic lifestyle. Hey, go look that up, kids, if you haven't looked it up. Living a sybaritic lifestyle, while most people are out there suffering, struggling just to get by. You know, I often hear in mainstream coverage of the Occupy Wall Street movement that what the people want isn't very clear. And like, oh, it's just a whole bunch of people wanting to resurrect those glorious hippie protest days of the 60s. And you know, there is a little bit of that going on. In the sense, think about this. In the 60s, though and here's the point. Those who have always pulled the strings in the background and stay in power forever, the establishment, if you will, or the secret government, if you like that better, or the corporatocracy, or the oligarchy, or whatever you want to call it, because all of those are appropriate, they maintain power because there is not a focused opposition, and they count on Americans having a pretty short attention span, and they count on Americans watching TV a lot and believing that the world revolves around them. And that's some of the Americans, and I've mentioned the others, who have to work so hard that they don't have time to do much thinking about anything else. But yes, it is like the 60s in that the Vietnam War provided an obvious point about which people with a diverse set of views but with a common interest could unite, and they united in such a way that they actually stopped the war. Now, in those days, of course, we had the war on TV, and the military knows better these days and won't let the war be on TV. And in New York last night, when the Occupy New York protest was taken apart by police, that didn't get to be on video either. So everybody's learned, try to keep it off video, but what is the counterbalance for that? Everybody has a little camera in their phone, or they have other cameras, and everybody has YouTube, and gee whiz, it seems like things are always balancing. But yes, there was a unifying thought in the 60s, and it was around stopping the war. And there's a unifying thought here around Occupy Wall Street. It started out as a single, basically, idea, which was, and this is kind of the quote, "We demand that Barack Obama ordain a presidential commission tasked with ending the influence money has over representatives in Washington." In other words, the idea was to stop the kind of corporate influence that results in the entire government having been bought and sold, and the interests of the people, the legitimate needs of the people, the aspirations of the people, and the ideas that could come forward were they not suppressed. All of that is because of greedy corporate behavior. Does this mean all corporate behavior is bad? No. Is a lot of it bad? Yes. Yes. And so, over the course of these weeks and months, as Occupy Wall Street has spread not only from New York to elsewhere, but has spread in terms of numbers and has spread in terms of ideas, we've seen plenty of good ideas expressed, and mainstream news keeps pretending like they don't know what those people are talking about or what they want. Baloney. It's very clear what they want. They want an end to corporate corruption. For example, let's look at some of their recent demands. You can go to the internet, you can find these all. I mean, it's not like a secret that these clowns can't find out what the people on Occupy Wall Street, their signs say what they're talking about. Their internet postings say what they're talking about, and anybody with the sense of a, I don't want to mention any media personalities. Anyway, anyone with the sense of an IROC could figure out, could easily tell what is upsetting people. So they want, for example, an end to wealth inequality. They want an end to police intimidation, because the only violence that's happened in all of this so far, the only violence has been instigated from the other side. Ending corporate censorship, ending capital punishment, ending American imperialism, ending joblessness, ending political corruption, ending health profiteering. All of that is so obvious. People are tired of what's being done in their name. So, Occupy Wall Street is, excuse me, Occupy Wall Street is not going away, it's growing. And what Occupy Wall Street seems to suggest is that most of the hot air that we've had to listen to so far, and we'll probably hear on the Democratic side too once things go into high gear, is going to be about avoiding the central issues that people want heard, acted upon, understood, and legally challenged. They want the vast wealth that this country has spent on something other than maintaining a vast global empire with a few people at the top profiting. It does not mean that we become some socialist European country. The whole debate over socialism is naive. Naive. The most successful things we've done, some of them, like Social Security and Medicare, are examples of socialism. And basically, socialism is talking about programs that the government creates that are there for people who need them and that aren't being provided well or properly or inexpensively by businesses. And as we've said before, some things are not meant to be part of a profit center in the first place. We can have government do more stuff and good stuff, and we can maintain the choice that all Americans want at the same time if we start to debate the real world where most Americans still hope for the best and are tired of being built from the low end of the deck. But we're all resourceful, and we're all in this together, and we can even find the good in those, well, you know, it's getting to be the Christmas season, and we're going to be talking about some of the people, let's go back to Charles Dickens' stories. Let's go back to understanding the magic of Christmas, where people understand that when they think of themselves in someone else's shoes and when they give without any thought of receiving, well, everything works well. Everything works well. We're a rich country with a rich heritage, and we want it back. It's been fun chatting with you folks. I feel you all. You feel pretty good. I want you to have a great week. I want you to have a great holiday season. And those of you who eat real turkey instead of tofurkey and fall asleep after the football game, have fun. Until next time.
Something calling, I don't want to go. I don't know why, I don't want to know. Whatever it is coming after me. It's in color, it's in stereo, and it's in 3D. I feel it in the depths of my soul. It comes over me and I lose control. I wake up in a brand new black hole. Here we go again. I feel it suck me in. My head begins to spin. Is this me or a twin? The face in the mirror grins. The dealer always wins. I've shed so many skins. I just confess my sins. Now the hurt begins. The needles and the pins. There's a brand new black hole in my head and it hurts.